Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Hakim Yadi, PhD, OBE, and CEO and co-founder of Closed Loop Medicine, a TechBio company developing prescription combination drug plus software products with the aim of bringing forward the promise of precision medicine. Welcome, Hakim.
Thank you, Nicole.
So, precision medicine is often spoken about these days as it is finally addressing the elephant in the room. One size, or more appropriately, one dose, does not fit all. Precision medicine hones in on treatment of the individual rather than just the disease, focusing on the reality that each patient is biologically different. Personalisation is very much key. So it is that Closed Loop Medicine's proprietary platform facilitates personalised drug dose optimization through integration of drugs, software and devices with patient-led digital experiences and closed-loop models of care. But before we get into this more and chat about what Closed Loop Medicine has been doing recently, perhaps, Hakim, you could tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, about the passion that has directed you along the path to what you do today.
Well, I'd say thank you, Nicole. Pleasure to be on. I'm the sort of person that's always been fascinated by the natural world and biology, always wanted to understand how the world worked from a biological level. And that led me into a career of science and then actually more onto the application of science through going into more of the business side of life sciences, doing a lot of work with the British government on the policy around science. And seeing that to make innovations really come to life, you need to be working across different domains of academia, the clinical interface, commercial, and policy. So my career has taken me through academia, through management consultancy and life sciences, spending some time seconded into the British government and working with them on the life sciences strategy, and then some very formative years as the chief executive of an organisation called the Northern Health Science Alliance, a collection of teaching hospitals and universities in the north of England, looking to bring innovation into the health innovation clusters in the north, with a view that hospitals that do more innovation have better patient outcomes. And if we look between north and south in England, we have a quite significant health disparity and health outcomes. There's a 20% higher chance of dying under the age of 70 if you live in the north than if you were born in the south. And one of the things that's really driven me to co-found Closed Loop Medicine is that technology can act as a democratizer of quality. It can take some of the very best standards, procedures, ways of thinking and working, particularly now with the advance of AI, and put that in a much larger population. So regardless of your individual background, your physician's availability or level of education with a particular drug, you can provide the very best care. And speaking to your point about one size fits all, one of the passions from my perspective is it is so blindingly obvious to me that having a one size fits all approach is mad. And I think I've shared this anecdote with you before. I've got two young daughters, and I cannot imagine a world when they grow up and they're still taking a one size fits all medicine. So for me, building Closed Loop Medicine with my co-founder and my team is around just bringing to life an opportunity for something that is personalized. Every other aspect of our lives, the coffee we drink, the apps on our phone, everything points towards a world of personalization, and yet we don't have that in healthcare.
Yes, that's bizarre, isn't it? The fact that the one thing that perhaps is, or certainly as is becoming clear, is central to healthcare's betterment, as it were, is this personalisation which exists elsewhere. So let's plunge into the topic at hand a bit further. Walk us through clearly, distinctly, what the notion of precision care for all means.
So the father of toxicology, Paracelsus, coined the phrase 500 years ago, only the dose makes the poison. Everything we put into our body can either be helpful or harmful, and it depends on the dose. Every physician knows this in their training. And the very best physicians who understand this will sit down and work with you as an individual to finesse and tweak the dose of the drug to get it right for you. Maximum efficacy and minimum side effects. The aim really at the heart of sort of precision care for all is to be able to take that quality of thinking and understanding and patient feedback that come through those relationships and have that same decision-making process in everyone's therapy. And software allows us to do that because with everyone having vast majority of people having a smartphone, if you could link software to a drug and have that decision-making power embedded within the technology, suddenly you're no longer dependent on accessing the very best physician. You have that technology alongside you. And that's really what we mean by precision care for all. It's precision care at a population health scale, taking the very best decision-making about you, your drug, and your outcomes, and making that standard.
Thank you. Let's go into the opportunities around smartphones in healthcare and the role of the software as a medical device in all this. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
I think we've seen, quite obvious to many of the listeners, an explosion of health apps, and there are great organizations like Orca out there making sure that the right ones are being used for the right time. But we're now at a stage where no longer are we just talking about an app, we're actually talking about a medical device that can sit on your phone. And the terminology in the sector is SAMD, software as a medical device. And this is effectively a high functioning, high fidelity piece of software that is able to collect data that could be from a wearable, a device, another medical device, or from the patient, and start to make effective calculations on what might be the right course of therapy for you or the right intervention for you, or to collect that data and provide that back to a physician on which she can base a clinical decision. Now, the fact that pretty much everyone does have a smartphone, and even an old smartphone is capable of this, means that we could start to bring this type of technology alongside mainstream therapeutics. And one of the really exciting things, particularly happening in the US, is some new guidance from the FDA, PDURS, which is demonstrating that the regulators are seeing how this type of software can be combined with a therapy, because it can be used to effectively enhance that therapy. So whilst we are developing apps that sit on smartphones, and many people might think we're a digital healthcare company, we see ourselves as a drug enhancement company, because we have a plethora of drugs across the pharmacopoeia where they were discovered, trialed, developed, launched, and marketed in an era when we didn't have this information. And so there's a huge opportunity, to your question, of bringing this type of technology alongside those therapeutics and just enhancing them and making them better for the individual by understanding that fine balance at an individual level between efficacy and side effects.
Exactly. It is this fine balance. And if we think about that efficacy and side effects and opportunities for optimizing the pharmacological element itself, going back to what closed loop medicine does, which is drug enhancement with the software alongside, can we turn to the hot topic at the moment, which is, of course, GLP-1s? What's the opportunity of applying closed loop medicine's approach in obesity, for instance, and providing patient-centered dose optimization for GLP-1s?
So I think everyone's seen that the GLP-1s and the wider class of drugs has brought a step change to care for patients with obesity, diabetes, and now we're seeing them being trialed in a range of other therapeutic areas. But what's been really interesting to see is what I call the lived experience of the drug, and that being the lived experience of patients and the lived experience of physicians. So one of the challenges, and you can see it on all the Reddit posts and people writing about their experience of the GLP-1s, is the side effects of gastrointestinal side effects of nausea and vomiting. And these side effects are dose related, but they do abate with time. And we're seeing in the real world that very high rates of discontinuation from these drugs. The tolerability of these drugs is really important. Up to 50% of type 2 diabetics are discontinuing this drug within 12 months. This is a drug that could be saving their lives, and yet it is intolerable for them, built in with other factors of accessibility and affordability, depending on the country you're in. We hear from physicians, and at the American Diabetes Association conference in Orlando this summer, I heard of physicians who were tweaking the drug dosing. And this is less around the specific amount of medicine, but actually, if you think about the drug labels that currently exist, about keeping patients on a slightly lower dose for longer until the side effects abate, then shifting the dose to the next step up, or even not taking patients to the maximum dose, taking them to the right dose for them, where they're losing the right amount of weight at the right rate, for example. Now, that happens when you've got a highly trained physician with time on their hands and a highly engaged patient able to have that dialogue and have that feedback. If you think about the scale of use that GLP-1s are seeing and will continue to see, it is entirely impractical that every physician, every endocrinologist is going to be able to work with their patient in that way. And so there exists an opportunity to use a closed loop model of care like we've seen in other diseases in the past and put that in place for the GLP-1s. And that's something we have already now developed. We are developing effectively a pharmacometric approach of combining biological insights, pharmacology, and understanding the individual therapeutic window of the drug to be able to calculate a range of factors, including weight loss trajectory, for example, the possibility of side effects. So for us, we see an opportunity to create much stronger impact for patients because they'll be able to stay on therapy for longer, managing those discontinuation rates. We know that with these drugs, we're seeing phenomenal decrease in cardiovascular risk scores. That's only going to happen if patient stays on therapy. And we hear from an already overworked, time-limited physician workforce that these drugs are adding to their workload, not taking away in terms of the fiddling. So if you can automate that process, which is what we're developing, you end up creating something that's not only beneficial for patients, but it's also beneficial for physicians.
Come back to this consideration of the physician workforce in a moment, but I just wanted to stay with perhaps some examples of what you termed a moment ago, pharmaconnective as the approach. So earlier this year, Teva's UK subsidiary joined forces with closed loop medicine in order to use your SAMD technology platform in the development of new personalised medicines. I was just wondering if you could tell us more about that alliance.
Absolutely. So we're delighted to work with the UK arm of Teva. We've had a very strong working relationship a number of years, and we're able to sort of consolidate that earlier this year. There is an opportunity, as I said earlier, that we've had a plethora of medicines out there that were trialed, developed, and launched on a one-size-fits-all model, brought to market back in a time when the vast majority of clinical trials were run on effectively 80-kilo white men, which means that every woman is overdosed. Every patient over 100 kg is underdosed, and that's just on a milligram per kilogram basis. So with Teva, as an innovative pharmaceuticals company with a very strong generics division, there's an opportunity to have innovative generics to bring personalization to those drugs that people don't think of as being innovative. Everyone thinks of sort of innovation in pharmaceuticals, of new modalities of therapeutics, new breakthrough therapies, and of course that is innovation. But I would argue there's a huge opportunity to bring innovation like the one we're talking about today to the existing drugs that patients are taking. And if you think in the US alone, 90% of medicines prescribed are generic. The biggest impact we could have on human health and disease is to work with companies like Teva and innovate the medicines that are already being used to enhance their efficacy and lived experience for patients. And that's the journey that we're on with Teva. We've selected a couple of key areas that we're going to be working on, but we both see this as something that shouldn't just apply to one class of drugs, but should be the way we think about medicines as part of our daily lives. Someone said to me the other day that the playlists we listen to on Spotify are more tailored than our prescriptions. Spotify chooses the next best song for you based on your listening habits. Prescriptions are written knowing nothing about you. And so there's a huge opportunity to bring technology that learns about you, your lived experience of a medicine, to optimize the next best drug for you rather than the next best song.
It's shocking, isn't it?
It is.
Optimizing the next best drug, yeah. Optimizing that next best drug instead of a song. That just really hits home the seriousness of the situation with this lack of personalization in healthcare.
If we compared it to music, basically, regardless of the previous track you'd listened to, everyone would have to listen to Elvis. Everyone, regardless of whether you liked it or not. It's a really interesting analogy.
It's a very interesting analogy, and I'm going to leave the listeners to just contemplate that. If you do like Elvis, fine. If you don't, think about that. Right. Okay. So if we shift now to another example, perhaps a little bit more focused of an example. In May this year, Closed Loop Medicine commenced the OptiZest study together with Pharmanovia, which is to investigate personalized dose management of a first-line antihypertensive in improving blood pressure control remotely. Could you possibly tell us more about that?
Yeah, so we've been working with Pharmanovia now. We've announced the partnership back last year, actually on World Hypertension Day, and now have been delivering the OptiZest study, as you say, here in the UK in the NHS. And the hypertensives are a great example of what we've been talking about. These are drugs that were developed and launched many, many years ago without the insights that we have today. And if you look at where most of the investment is in pharmaceuticals, there's very little in hypertension. There is a couple of next generation sort of treatment resistant hypertensive initiatives out there, but not very much in sort of what you'd consider elevated blood pressure. And yet we have not got hypertension under control. Fewer than 50% of effective adults receive effective treatment, and only 1 in 5 of them actually maintain disease control. Yet, according to the industry, we have the drugs that work. One of the big challenges with a disease like hypertension, often referred to as the silent killer with no real symptoms, is ensuring patients stay on therapy and that issues like side effects don't become one of the reasons why a patient might discontinue. So Pharmanovia, as a value-added medicines company, sees the opportunity of bringing this type of technology as an enhancement to those vintage brands that have been on the market for years but have never been optimized. And the partnership, and it is a genuine partnership with the team at Pharmanovia, is to really understand how we can utilize this technology to have a better understanding of a patient's blood pressure, their lived experience of any side effects, their regimen of therapy, to be able to tailor that regimen and start to make recommendations to the physician on what the right course of action would be, and to come back to an earlier point we discussed, standardize that across the population. And what's been really interesting here is we published data in the Journal of American Hypertension Association on another first-line antihypertensive therapy, amlodipine, earlier in the year. And we ran a clinical trial at Bart's Teaching Hospital with Queen Mary University. And I was very fortunate to get the opportunity to go and meet the patients who'd been through the study. And one of the things we saw through the trial data is that patients were extremely adherent to our app. And I had the opportunity to ask the patients why, because it was much higher than you expect from standard care, certainly from the literature. And everyone sort of talks about apps being, they're not sticky, people use them, then they drop off, and particularly in sort of the first generation of digital health apps. And what was really powerful listening to the patients who'd been on our study was that they wanted to put the data into the software, into the app. They wanted it to be right because they knew that the data being used, or so the data they generated, was being used to change the dose of the medicine that they were putting back in their body. There was a direct relationship between my donation of my data and myself getting something back, which is tailored precision to them. And I think the really powerful opportunity that software as a medical device, particularly in combination with a therapeutic, can bring is changing the relationship between the patient, their medicine, and their physician, because it's putting them in a position of power, because I'm giving the data that's going to be used to change the decision on my dose. And that's really what the work with the OptiZest study with Pharmanovia is all about, is changing the relationship between the patient, the physician, and their medication for better long-term adherence, so that we can flatten the curve of the impact of cardiovascular disease, still one of the world's largest killers.
I mean, if we think about this optimization of pathways for this, as you say, improved population health with these new technologies, at the sort of same time as this was happening in May, following the launch last year with Pharmanovia and that partnership, you also took part in a panel in late spring this year at the Galien Forum at London Science Museum. There was a panel with Duncan Richards, Professor of Clinical Therapeutics at the University of Oxford, and Gilead's Hilary Hutton-Squire and Richard Talbot of the ABPI, as well as Professor Gary Ford of Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley. And you were discussing and assessing how ready the public and private sectors are in adapting to these new tech innovations that, perhaps for better or for worse, depending on, as you say, these clinical trials and outcomes, will shape that patient journey, not just the UK in the future, but at the moment the UK, obviously, for the remainder of this decade and beyond. And during that panel, you mentioned the importance of consideration of, as you mentioned earlier today, clinical workflows and also cost reduction in bringing such innovation to market. And this is sort of a fundamental of closed-loop medicine's drug plus concept. So I was wondering if you could just sort of broaden out and at the same time tie everything together that we've been discussing.
I'll certainly try. I think if we look at the UK, we look at the NHS, we are in quite hopefully one of the best positions to leverage clinical insight from the NHS electronic medical record. It's coined as the cradle to grave nirvana of digital health in terms of understanding health journeys and having every intervention of your life linked back to a single ID number. That being said, one of the challenges we have is with this high fidelity clinical data set that we have, what we seem to lack is the ability to put a cost base against it and think about savings. So one of the things that is ubiquitous among all of these different types of technology interventions is they require investment. And many of them are built around the premise, because I think, every entrepreneur in healthcare recognizes that their technology has to do two things. It has to improve outcomes and it has to lower cost, but it requires investment. And being able to really understand in any health system how either an investment made in year one can bring benefits in year 2, 3, 4, etc., becomes important. That's somewhat easier than the models where an investment in primary care makes a saving in secondary. And that's where the panel were discussing the challenges of bringing some of these, particularly on that panel, some very high cost innovations from pharma, where yes, from one budget, you might be taking a hit because that's where the impact is, but actually the savings are linked to the wider health innovation economy. And so we focus a lot on the investments in the plumbing of the sort of the digital waterways of connecting primary, secondary care and different digital health infrastructures. I would like to see us also invest in building the strong health economic foundations to be able to make these assessments much more easily than we're able to do at the moment, and much more locally than we're able to do at the moment, to enable a greater adoption. Because in a potentially cost-constrained environment, making investments in a new technology, particularly potentially an unproven one, becomes very difficult if you're not the one that's going to be making that saving.
So this building strong health economic foundations for greater adoption, this comes back also to the benefits to the population at large. And I put the onus there on at large because you began our conversation today actually by discussing your journey to what you do at the moment with closed loop medicine. And you mentioned the great disparities that still exist in terms of health equality. And during the Galien Forum panel also, this topic of health equality, or one should say perhaps inequality, is a as yet unmet problem. And you mentioned that Labour seemed to have more meaningful intentions. So I just wondered if, given where we are today, you wanted to comment at all on the future trajectory of the NHS now that we are under the new government and, of course, following the Darby report.
And this is entirely personal opinion, I should say. It's not the view of closed loop medicine, but personally here the NHS has always been a political football, and that remains a challenge. And I think until we can start to think about our national health service as something that can be depoliticized, we will always have challenges over how the left and the right think about the health service. That being said, we're not in that environment. It is still very much a political football, and it's probably fair to say that the level of trust that the populace, the voting public, would have placed with the types of interventions and requirements needed to change the health system from a Tory government being harder to swallow with a view that everyone has this belief it's there to privatise. My hope, my aspiration is that there is hopefully a greater level of accommodation to some of the hard decisions that do need to be made around bringing the NHS into an environment where it does work for the population of today with a Labour government as opposed to a Conservative one. And that, only time will tell, but it's certainly a hypothesis that I have and I'm going to be following.
We like personal opinions on this podcast, so thank you for sharing yours. If we stick with this concept of futures now, and to sort of close off a very interesting podcast, and thank you for your time given to it today. I actually spoke with you last year at Frontiers Health in Rome, and I understand that you'll be speaking again at Frontiers Health this year in Berlin. And that's going to be in a fireside chat exploring some of what we've been discussing today. But given that that's going to be such a forward-looking and forward-working event, in order to close our current conversation, I just wondered if you wanted to share any projections you might have, again, perhaps a personal opinion, for the future of precision medicine and more specifically the possibilities of the drug plus software product approach that closed loop medicine does so well in the next few years.
Thank you, Nicole. My forward-looking approach is that we no longer need the term precision medicine. The very fact that we have the term precision medicine therefore assumes that we have imprecise medicine. And if we were to be brutal and frank with the population and say the vast majority of you on day to day receive imprecise medicine and a very few receive precise medicine, and explained what that meant in terms of everything we've been discussing today and more, I think people would be a bit shocked.
Absolutely.
So I have a very similar view with the term digital health. I think it's an absolutely appalling phrase. We don't talk about digital banking or digital movies. It's just how we watch movies and how we do banking in the 21st century. So my aspiration, my sort of longer term view is, and what closed loop medicine is trying to achieve, is trying to make the term precision medicine and digital health redundant. And that for me is a big motivating force for everything that we do at closed loop medicine. Because when we are able to no longer use the phrase digital health and it's just become how healthcare is delivered, whether it's in hospital, at home, in the community, or that actually every prescription comes with a digital companion, which we'll be talking about in Berlin, that enables the patient to receive augmented care. It might be delivering a behavioral therapy alongside the drug, for example. It might be doing dose optimization. It might be helping the patient just go through the journey of having a chronic disease and getting to a better outcome. That will be a place where medicine has become more precise and much more like Spotify than it currently is.
Thank you very much, Hakim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Nicole.
And so that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous instalments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, and pretty much wherever you get your other podcasts. Just search for pharmaphorum and press subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us as well on X or Twitter and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.